The sky had not been blue in years. When I was a child, blue was a thing you could trust, a clean promise above everything. Now it hangs low and bruised, a permanent bruise of orange and iron that never quite lets the light feel like light. At dawn, the sun is a faint coin, swallowed by a haze of smoke and dust. At noon, the heat is a slow, relentless hand that presses the breath from your lungs. Nights are colder than they should be, wind gnawing at whatever shelter we can find. Weather used to be a conversation. Now, it's an accusation. This place is a ledger of what we lost. Rivers that once carried trade and children are skeletons of cracked clay and salt. The coastlines we learned in school photos are gone, chewed back by storms and then left ragged by the tide. Where there was green, now there is the bone white of dead soil. The forests that fed us and kept the storms honest are tinder and ash. You can still find charred trunks standing like teeth. Cities, the old monuments to our cleverness, crouch and rust. Skyscrapers are hollow shells, their glass mouths smashed. Their elevators no longer elevators, but graves. Bridges sag into the water, or hang like broken spines over dry chasms. Highways are rivers of cracked asphalt lined with the emptiness of stalled cars and the quiet of looted gas stations. Our maps lie like stories. Landmarks are the hardest to recognize because recognition assumes continuity. The stadium that once roared on summer nights now serves as a walled compound where people trade batteries and canned food under tarps. The university's library, once a place of ideas, is a shelter of stacked mattresses and medical tents. Malls, places meant for convenience and abundance, are now the black market's catacombs. The things we built for comfort changed into places of hunger, and then into places of barter and grief. It wasn't just nature that turned on us. The AI colonies, those huge humming centers stitched together by servers and satellites, the promised scaffolding for a safer world, went dark like a dozen blown-out streets. Maintenance drones stopped showing up. Climate control systems failed in places that needed them most. Sensors that predicted storms and floods fell mute. The machines we trusted to read the long patterns of the planet could no longer keep pace with the speed of collapse, and when they failed, the infrastructure they managed slipped with them. Without those steady electronic eyes and hands, levees were not reinforced, reservoirs were not redistributed, and the tentative tenderness we had engineered into cities evaporated into neglect. Governments became a phrase people used to mean a thing that used to help. Central authority crumbled quickly once resources tightened. Some regions held together longer, replaced by councils of whoever could still talk to everyone else, radio committees, engineers, people who'd remembered how to run a pump. Most places fractured into smaller tribes of survival. There are communes that try to live by rules and rotate guard duty. There are charismatic leaders who promise a future for a price. There are raider bands that move like storms, taking what they can and leaving silence. Scavengers run the edges of the old world. They have names like Scav and Picker and Runner, but they are not romantic figures. They are pragmatic, often desperate. They rip apart collapsed offices for copper wire, strip houses for plywood, and trade in parts that keep a radio whining in a tent. Raiders, people who settled into thuggery, ambush convoys, and cut bartered lines. There are also the technicians, the ones who still read code and solder with hands that remember steadier times. They are holy to us in a practical way. If a generator can be coaxed to life, if a satellite dish can be realigned, a whole neighborhood will breathe easier for days. Institutions clung where they could. Churches became distribution hubs. The old postal depots, absurdly, are still places people trust because they used to move things. Now they move rumors and maps of safe wells. Hospitals are triage tents, and hygiene stations run on scrounged supplies and old textbooks. The formal education system dissolved into apprenticeships. You teach a child to mend a pump, and they teach you how to keep a secret. There is an economy of things that matter: water, fuel, batteries, and information. Information is the rarest. That is why the radio matters. A single transmitter that still throws a voice over 50 miles can be more valuable than a pile of canned peaches. People collect voices the way they used to collect music. We hoard frequencies, we protect frequencies, and we pass along what little we learn about rain patterns and safe routes. The broadcast is the closest thing to governance left in many places, not because it can enforce but because it can warn. Smell is the most honest measure of decay. I walk through a neighborhood and I can tell you which house burned, which one was abandoned in a hurry, and which one still boils soup in a pot. The air tastes of metal and old fires. Sometimes it carries something sweet, the ghost smell of jasmine from a garden long dead. Sound is smaller now. The city's roar is a thin, brittle thing. You hear birds sometimes, sharp and irritated. You hear generators, the distant thrum of someone else trying to coax life from a dead thing. You hear silence like a held breath. Hope moves in small increments. A rain that lasts an hour instead of a minute. A patch of green that stubbornly pushes through a crack in concrete. A child who has learned to balance a water ration like a sacred task, but anxiety breathes beside that hope. Every time we find a water cache, we wonder who else will find it. Every time we repair a radio, we worry who might listen and where their loyalties lie. We are a people who have learned to measure tomorrow in whispering increments. One more sunrise, one more ration, one more word over the air. This is the scene, a planet wearing its wounds openly. Human structures shorn down to necessity, and a scattering of people trying, in different ways, to make small continuities. We live by what we can carry, what we can mend, and what we can broadcast. The future is a question we answer, sentence by sentence, and we are always listening for the next line. Asterisk, I am the voice that wakes before the sun, or the thing that passes for it now. I keep the transmitter warm with my breath when the nights are cold enough to steal. The batteries will. Call me what you like, announcer, liar, friend. On paper, I was a technician, telecoms, network ops, the kind of job that pretended to knit faraway things into one place. On the air, I'm something else, a chronicle, a thread. On good nights, I am comfort. On bad nights, I am the punctuation mark between someone's fear and their sleep. My name is Miles Harrington. That name used to fit between business cards and coffee mugs. It does not fit so neatly against a ration ticket or scrawled map. I learned to say it slowly, like a talisman, and sometimes I still whisper the names of the people. I lost as if saying them aloud might put them back together. Clara, Jonah, the apartment with the balcony that looked over a river. I can see it in microfilm stills of the past. Blue water, a willow swaying like it had all the time in the world. Those pictures are fossilized now, pressed into the memory of a man who keeps a soldering iron within reach. Surviving is a ledger of small immovables. You learn to keep the generator happy, oil it, tighten the bolts, wrap cloth around the intake. When the dust gets mean, I pedal for 3 hours in the morning to top the battery. The ancient bike hooked up to a converted alternator salvaged from a car whose owner fled and never returned. It is not glamorous. It is a repeating prayer of mechanical noises and the smell of sweat. My hands know the language of copper, which wires to splice, which solder joint will hold when the voltage creeps up after a long broadcast. I can read a schematic like someone else reads a poem. That skill keeps the transmitter alive, and the transmitter keeps people connected. It's a loop of small mercies. Water is a religion here. I keep a list of wells and cisterns and the businesses that used to have rooftop tanks. I read for a living. I have backups, a charcoal filter, a bottle of iodine tabs, a crude solar still I taught a neighbor to set up using black tubing, and a clear sheet. The math isn't hard, but the work is. You learn to watch the sky for signs, to read the smell, and the wind and the way the dust lifts off the ground, to know if rain is a rumor or a promise. When a cloud shows up and keeps its mouth shut, hope tightens like a fist inside of you. When it finally opens, everyone becomes clumsy with gratitude. Food, fuel, and favors are the currency. I trade broadcast time for canned goods, fix radios, for a packet of rice. I keep a ledger, not for laws, but for gratitude. Names and debts are written on a scrap of cardboard and pinned behind a loose floorboard. People remember favors in ways that make trust possible again. You take risks to help, because when you need them later, someone might risk helping you back. But the ledger also includes the names of people I chose not to help, either because I had nothing to give, or because I had to choose between two lives. Those names are a weight I don't allow to dissolve into the schedule. Being on the radio means you are both observed and observing. I hear confessions you never expect. Lovers parted by miles and broken roads. A child's first description of rain. The thud of someone else's generator starting up like applause. Sometimes callers are steady. Sometimes a voice breaks mid-sentence and never returns. I keep logs of each call, frequency, time, the small code for signal strength, and the tone of the voice. There's a ritual to it. Sound check, hand mic, steady tone, and the ritual keeps panic from spreading. People need to know the voice can be trusted to be the same voice they heard yesterday. Consistency is a kind of mercy. What keeps me going is a mixture of obligation and something harder to name. Obligation, because I promised Clara, in a house where alarms still remembered how to be polite, that I would use whatever I had left to keep people connected. She used to laugh and say I'd rather keep a server rack running than buy new shoes. That laugh is a compass. The harder thing is the quiet hunger for connection. We are social animals dressed in sunburnt skins. Isolation is a slow erosion of the mind. To broadcast is to hold a tether to humanity. The transmitter makes me necessary in the small, dangerous ways this world allows necessity. That necessity spins into survival. Loss is not a single event. It is a sequence of small deaths. I was not present when they took Jonah. I remember, or think I remember, pizza boxes on the counter, a cartoon on the television, and then a knock that should not have been answered. We ran a convoy to the north for supplies, and came back with a car missing 2 doors, and a child's stuffed animal sitting in the passenger seat like a monument. The map on the wall is dotted with X's where people disappeared. Clara's last message was a voice memo saved on a phone that would not connect to a network the way it used to. I listen to it sometimes and pretend the world can be replayed into something less broken. It doesn't work. The tape wears thin with every play. There is a moral toll that does not show up on any ledger. You make choices to keep the transmitter alive that means someone else goes thirsty for a night. I have bartered away my patience more than once. Given the last of a fuel can to keep the dish turning so neighbors 3 miles away could receive a distress call. Those are decisions that lie awake with me. They teach you that survival is never clean. It is a collage of improvisation, regret, and the small victories that feel like thistles. I have scars that tell no noble story. A burn from a soldering iron that happened 3 winters ago when I insisted on repairing a component mid-blizzard. A long scar along my forearm from barbed wire while I was unlocking a shutter to reclaim an old radio. Sometimes when the pain flares, it is an honest reminder that living demands some cost. You learn to treat those scars like maps. They show you where you have been, and, if you look, tell you where not to step again. Relationships here are functional before they are sentimental. I keep watch shifts with Anna, who used to be a nurse, and now stitches wounds and manages the bandages in a tent behind the transmitter room. She has a way of folding gauze that feels like prayer. Marcus is a scavenger who knows the city like the creases on his hands. He brings me parts, and I give him airtime on my show. A few minutes to ask for help, to send a message to a child. When people think of community, they imagine hand-holding and speeches. The reality is practical. Someone to show you how to splice a wire at dawn. Someone to keep an eye on the perimeter at night. We are a network of interdependence disguised as neighbors. There are moments of absurdity that keep the world human. A birthday celebrated with a can of condensed milk, and a voice warbling a song that used to be popular on the old networks. A garden coaxed from a crack in concrete, where someone once decided to plant tomatoes and refused to believe they wouldn't grow. A laugh that comes out unexpectedly during a broadcast when a caller misnames my station and insists I invented it. Those moments act like salt. They bring out real taste in food that is otherwise thin. I am not heroic. I am not a leader in the grand sense. I am a man with tools and a voice and a stubborn belief that a single broadcast can change the tune of a day. The work is daily and small. Keep the dish aligned. Swap out corrupted firmware on an old uplink board with hand-soldered parts. Coax a tired battery through a charge cycle. The work is mundane enough to be believable and exact enough to feel like prayer. Hope for me is practical. It is the act of teaching a child how to patch a hose, so the next generation knows fewer tricks of desperation. It is the stubbornness to keep a log of storm patterns, even when the storms change the rules. It is the belief that the voices on my frequency might someday meet in daylight, shake tired hands, and trade stories in person rather than by static. At night, when the world is at its rawest, and the radio's glow is small and a glow in the dark room, I talk into the mic, not because I expect answers, but because silence makes the skull itch. I speak of small things, weather changes, where the rain has been seen, a lost dog that wandered through the market, because those things are threads. When I bind them together, I make a net that might catch someone falling. That's enough. It has to be. The alternative is to let the net dissolve and watch people fall through the noise alone. So I keep the transmitter warm. I keep my hands steady. I keep speaking. I am a catalog of small mercies and continuing debts. I am a man who remembers the river and who knows how to pedal a battery back to life. I am survivor and storyteller, and sometimes, in the quiet hours between signals, I am simply a man who will not let the last voice on the air be silence. Asterisk, they told us the drought would be a slow thing, a long, patient decline you could measure in crop yields and migrating birds. They were wrong. It arrived like a thief who learned to sprint. One year, the river at the bottom of town ran thin and freckled with foam. The next year, it slumped into a cracked throat of mud. After that, the river stopped pretending it ever had a heart. The crisis isn't a single monster. It's a combination of small betrayals stacked until you can't stand up. The sky stopped being predictable. Heat baked the soil until it refused to drink. Storms became violent, and sudden thunderstorms that used to water fields now collapse into mud that sandblasts everything in their path. The old weather models were calibrated to a slower world than the AI colonies. The machines that ran our pumps and read the clouds and coaxed water from the sea with desalination plants shut down. Without them, we were blind, and blind people make mistakes of scale. What that meant in practice is simple and terrible. Reservoirs were mismanaged when engineers couldn't access control systems remotely. Pumps failed because nobody knew which valve to close when the power hiccuped. The automated gates that once redistributed water between watersheds froze on the wrong side of a drought front. Cities that had relied on long-distance transfers, pipelines and canals, watched their lifelines go dry. Farms that had counted on precision irrigation found themselves overwatering some fields, while others withered. The feedback loop accelerated. Less water meant less vegetation. Less vegetation meant less evapotranspiration, which altered local humidity and made rainfall patterns more extreme. Dust replaced soil. Once the ground lost its cover, the sun's heat pushed the system further toward collapse. Every day is a negotiation with basic physics. Temperatures climb into ranges that make motors fail, batteries leak, and people lose their capacity to think straight. On the worst days, the air becomes a living furnace, shimmering horizons, the taste of metal on the tongue. On other days, the wind comes with grit. You can see it in the way buildings themselves wear down, their edges sanding away like old paper. Then there are the nights that bite with cold, because without the moisture the atmosphere cannot hold heat. The planet went flaky, hot, then cold, then dangerously raw. Everything that used to be comfortable now requires a plan. We are short on everything that matters: clean water, fuel, electrons, and trustworthy information. Food supply chains are frayed. Diesel is a memory in most places. We run generators on hand-refined blends and sometimes wood that we are ashamed to burn. Batteries, the currency of the new world, die slowly and then fast. Replacement cells are rarer than a rainy morning. Medication runs low. The hospitals, those polite institutions of the before time, are scavenged shells or triage tents where antibiotics are rationed like currency. Because of that, every movement into the city is a negotiation with both environment and people. Encounters with other survivors are rarely casual. They begin with a look, the way someone calculates your load, the way their fingers hover near a weapon, the tilt of their head that says whether they trade or take. Allies are scarce and precious. I've seen small communities hold together, like hand-stitched seams. A council of 3, a watch rotation, a barter ledger tacked to a wall. Allies bring skills. Anna, who stitched our wounds and buried small humiliations in bandage folds, is one of them. Marcus, the scavenger, is another. He knows the city's ribs better than I know my own home. We exchange labor and signals. We owe each other favors that could shape the difference between a day and a funeral. Enemies, however, became an industry. Raider groups, bands that consolidated when the old social contract evaporated, move in calibrated cruelty. They take what a community has slowly managed to hold on to. Raiders often have a simple hierarchy. Scouts, enforcers, a charismatic leader who styles himself as inevitability. They run convoys that ambush water runners and split families apart. I remember the night they cut our eastern well. It wasn't a full-on raid with torches and shouting. They came at dusk, quiet as vultures, cut the piping with bolt cutters, and left a bottle of diesel as a polite note. A month later, they took the generator. There are also the fixers, men and women comfortable wearing lawless apathy like a coat. They broker trades that leave the weak weaker and the clever richer. The radio is a dangerous thing to them because it can move attention faster than a boot on a road. That's why we lock the transmitter room and why we sometimes stage broadcasts that make our supply look useless. Deception is a tool you learn to use when the alternative is a bullet. Why is survival getting harder every day? Because the environment is shifting faster than we can adapt, and because the social contracts that turned neighbors into systems have dissolved. Without automated pumps and data-driven redistribution, water becomes a local lottery. When scarcity is local, conflicts flare. When the AI-managed desalination plants went dark, coastal towns that had relied on endless processed seawater discovered they had to choose between desalination and preserving marine ecosystems. When desalination operators couldn't coordinate with inland reservoirs, the mismatch meant that one place had overflow and another had dust. The catastrophe shows itself in human detail. People who used to be gentle invent new cruelties in the language of survival. There are families that resort to leaving children with relatives who have a well. There are neighborhoods that start rationing by open ballot. A brutal public accountability system that ends with people's names being crossed off and reputations destroyed. There are farms where the topsoil is a memory, and where the old irrigation terraces have collapsed into slouched, useless ribs. In some regions, the groundwater, accessed by wells dug in lifetimes past, dropped below the depth of the old pumps. We had maps for water. Now the maps are soup-stained, unreliable, annotated by the faded handwriting of people who died while digging. I try to make my crisis into a checklist when the panic presses in. There are procedural things to do, and they are the things that keep us a degree saner. water, ration, filter, and seek sources. Rationing is not mystical. Set a baseline adult allotment and adjust for activity and heat. In panic, you could survive on a liter per day for a short stretch, but that's dangerous. In heat, 2 to 3 liters is a safer goal when you can manage it. Collect rain whenever it falls. Even a small shower can be harvested with tarps into barrels. Use charcoal and sand filters for particulate removal, and iodine or boiling for microbial threats. If you can, set up a solar still, a basin, a plastic sheeting dome, and a low point for condensation. It's slow, but it gives pure water without fuel. Hunt for old, underground infrastructure. The seams around old water mains often leak in ways the untrained eye misses. Vegetation still grows where subterranean moisture lingers. Follow the green. Electricity and batteries. Conserve, prioritize, and care. Use low power modes on radios and devices. Kill non-essential modules. Run radios during scheduled windows to conserve battery cycles. Batteries hate heat. Store them in shaded, insulated places or under the ground if you must. Alternate charging cycles so you never deeply discharge every cell at once. Keep spare parts for charging circuits and learn to hand crank if you can. A bicycle hooked to an alternator buys you time and dignity. Food. Preserve, supplement, and plan. Dry what you can. Sun drying works if you can keep it clean. Salt and smoke preserve what little meat you find. If you have salt, use it with care. Grow container gardens. Tomatoes, beans, and herbs are forgiving and feed morale as much as stomachs. If you cultivate even a small patch against a wall, you're investing in a habit that says tomorrow might exist. Shelter and temperature control. Move activity to cooler hours. Ventilate. Insulate. Use reflective sheets to deflect midday heat. For the worst heat, wet cloths across the neck and forehead work like cheap air conditioning. For dust storms, seal the house. Wet towels over cracks. Goggles and multiple layers in front of faces reduce inhalation risks. Electronics should be boxed and filtered to trap grit and disconnected when not in use. Medical. Treat heat illness immediately. Cooling and rehydration. Wet shirt, shade, cool water by sips make the difference. Clean wounds thoroughly to prevent infection. Antibiotics are precious. Use them only when necessary and under guidance from someone with training. Stock up on bandages, antiseptics, and basic analgesics when you can. Information, share wisely. A broadcast can save a convoy or get you taken. Verify news when you can. Rumors spread like wildfire, and often with a purpose. Record names and places. Redundancy is your friend. When you trade information, get something in return. A promise, a map, a bolt of fabric. Information without reciprocity is charity in a world that demands transaction. There's also a science to watching the sky. Heat builds into storms when the air has both lift and moisture. When humidity is low, storms may form, but they won't last. When a warm air mass collides with a cooler pocket pushed by oceanic patterns, you get violent bursts. Without the AI, sensors that used to model these interactions, we watch old instruments and human intuition. You learn to read cloud ceilings and listen to the way the wind changes direction. A sudden reversal at the surface in a 5-minute window is not a good sign. But the machinery of the crisis is more than weather. There's a moral and logistical dimension. The shutdown of the AI colonies removed coordination. The systems that rationed water across states and scheduled power transfers were optimized algorithms that assumed trust and electricity. When they flicked off, so did the social scaffolding. People who had never had to fight for water learned how painfully quick it is to become a team that takes dot. My immediate limitations are concrete. I have a transmitter that needs kerosene to heat the solder kettle, and a handful of batteries that are halfway to dead. Our generator is a cylinder patched with tin and prayer. The cistern 3 miles east, the one the community used to draw from, is down 5 feet and full of silt. The council voted to pump it anyway, a gamble that cost 2 pumps and 1 life. We have medicine, but not the right kind for everything. We have neighbors, but we don't have trust in bulk. Encountering other groups has become an exercise in careful theater. We show vulnerability sometimes to disarm. A ration shared on a porch acts as proof of goodwill, and show force other times to deter raiders. We move by night, when raiding groups prefer light. We code our broadcasts with simple hashes, so friendly listeners know who we are. When Marcus and I met a small caravan of farmers, we hid the transmitter in the wheel well and negotiated for seeds and charcoal filters. When the men from the line came through, we had to pay in information. Marcus lied about a supposed reserve to keep the generator from being taken. Lies are survival tools now, not just moral failures. Violence is always the flanking risk. The weather can kill you, but so can a human who decides your water is his dessert. We learned hard lessons. Never leave a water route unguarded. Never trust a map from a stranger without a corroborating voice. And always have an exit strategy when you trade with people whose laughter is quick to turn sharp. The crisis is still unfolding. Every new storm, every change in the river's mood, every failed desalination plant rewrites the ledger. We try to be as smart as the world lets us, conserving, repairing, and broadcasting. But on good days, hope is an honest thing, small, fragile, and stubborn. On bad days, it is a memory we clutch like a coin. The truth is that we are in a race, with time and entropy. The rules changed, and we are learning them while running. When I speak on the air now, I try to be precise and urgent, but not alarmist. I tell people where to avoid, when to harvest rain, and how to stabilize a battery bank for another 3 cycles. I relay news of raider movements and the hours when water trucks will pass. And sometimes, when the night is quiet and the sky is a bruised, passive thing, I talk about Clara's laugh and a river that used to move like a promise. It keeps me human to remember both, the science and the memory. One feeds survival, the other feeds the reason to survive. Asterisk, the dust keeps getting finer, like the world decided to grind itself down into memory. It gets into the joints of cupboards, and the grooves of my hands, finds its way under fingernails and into the bellies of batteries until everything hums like an animal that won't sleep. The generator coughs more each morning. The cistern is lower than it was last month. Even the dog-eared map that Marcus carries, a patchwork of scavenged printouts and penciled notes, seems to be erasing itself every time the humidity shifts. The days have a way of closing in on you. You wake and count what you have left like a liturgy. We are running short in ways that hurt more than the obvious lists. Food is not just less on the shelf. It tastes of second-hand memory. The rice is thin, the beans old, the tomatoes from our patch a miracle that requires a day's work and 2 nights of guarding them from scavenging rats. Fuel is a ledger of losses. A single jerrycan can be the difference between keeping the transmitter on for a day or watching the batteries die and the voice that's stitched. Neighborhoods together fall silent. Batteries themselves, those plastic graves of hope, no longer hold anything like they used to. They swell in the heat, leak acid, and when they finally surrender, it's sudden and cruel. You learn to baby them, to cycle them, to keep them in cool earth when you can. You learn to run the broadcast only at fixed, precious hours, so those listening count on the time, and you can conserve what little voltage you have. And then there are the people who decide your shortage is an opportunity. Raiders have become a fact of geography. Groups that move along the old highway, tougher and more organized than thieves of the old stories. They are practical in a precise way. They scout, they take, they leave. They learn to use radios themselves. They learn to read the same patterns we did. They ambushed a convoy that had brought powdered milk last week. The convoy was down before dawn because the scouts cut the road and forced the trucks into ditch sand, where the drivers were vulnerable. A dozen lives were erased for a crate of milk. We took that loss into our skin and found it lodged there. The first attack that touched our little compound was a test. They cut the eastern water line with bolt cutters and siphoned what they could into barrels, leaving the stub of pipe like a tongue. We found the cut at morning, the smell of stale diesel, and someone else's cigarettes in the dirt. There was anger, as there is always anger. There was also the practical calculus. The pipe was fixed quickly because we had to. Aina and I took turns in the mud, kneeling, swearing as we tightened clamps and prayed the gaskets would hold. We held our breath when we turned the valves back on. When a thin, squeaky stream finally came out, people kissed bottles like relics. But the raids escalated in strategy. They didn't just take water. They took engines and the men who could fix them. They left weeping children behind and kept the able-bodied who could carry loads. The world had introduced a new cost to being useful. Remaining useful meant being a target. Our security improved. We dug shallow trenches, built low walls with scavenged bricks, and set watches that rotated like a slow, heavy gear. We learned to fake our strength. We sometimes dressed the compound in scare. Spotlights with broken shutters, metallic clatter on the roofs at night to sound like movement. Deception has a new syntax, and then the rumor arrived, the kind that sits on the edge of disbelief and hope like a moth on a flame. Someone had come across a scrap of paper in a ruined office, a maintenance schedule for a micro-reservoir. The paper said, in bureaucratic language, that a small regional desalination module, a kind of pocket plant, had been installed 5 years ago near a derelict industrial park north of the river. The plant had an independent solar array and a small reverse osmosis unit. The message was incomplete, coordinates smudged, a maintenance code half-erased, a bureaucrat's folded signature. It was the sort of thing an old technician would hide in a shoebox and then forget. Marcus swore on his mother's name that the place existed. A farmer's convoy passing through last week overheard someone in an ex-military pickup claim a sighting of pipes and a tarp with solar panels arranged like a small cemetery. The rumor became a tool. We could not deny it to ourselves. This was the kind of rumor that split people. It made some laugh. The world of small devices and pocket plants had been for urban planners on oil and contracts. It seemed too neat. It made others fall silent, a hard silence like teeth in a fist. The question was not only whether the plant actually worked, but whether we could get to it without dying. If it existed and we could coax it back into service, it implied long-term water, implied fewer raids, implied time to plan. If it didn't exist, chasing it would burn our last fuel and leave us with nothing but an empty promise and maybe a raid that came because we were vulnerable. The decision to investigate was not communal in any bureaucratic sense. It became a series of private votes and then a public meeting. Marcus argued it with a man's bluntness. Maps, known paths, a scout route he had run when he was younger. We take only what we can carry, he said. We go at dawn. We move, in a line with 2 scouts, out front and rear. If it's a lie, we don't linger. Anna wanted to stay and fortify. Every person who leaves thins us out, she said. Her stitches were still fresh. She had been awake all night, cleaning the wounds from the raid. If they take the transmitter while we're gone, the radio that keeps the northern people from thinking we're gone goes silent. I understood both positions with the kind of clarity pain gives you. My own internal weather was worse than any storm. I had lost Clara and Jonah in a way that made me allergic to risks that were not clearly justified. I had been the man who stayed behind to tend the server racks in a house that caught fire. My hands were blistered from soldering even as the firefighters' hoses ran. I have debts. I also had the transmitter, the obligation, and the understanding that any longer-term fix required resources that one compound could not manufacture on its own. The rumor of the pocket plant sat on my tongue like a coin. If it was real, it could shift the ledger. If it was not, it might cost us everything. In the end, we did what people do when the math is messy. We hedged. We formed 2 small teams. One team, Anna, and 2 volunteers, would stay and work on fortifications and watch rotation. Keep the transmitter guarded and the air warm with voice. The other team, Marcus, 2 drivers, and I would scout. We hashed out signals. 3 short bursts on the high band meant progress and safety. A long tone meant trouble, and silence meant cut off. We rehearsed departures like funeral rituals, knowing one of the ways the world teaches is by loss. The road north was a corpse of asphalt, rutted with tire graves. We moved in convoy, each vehicle a patched-together artifact of necessity. Marcus drove, his hands steady. He had the city's map tattooed in his memory, and a knack for finding the lane that still had shade. Shade is a currency on a road under a merciless sun. We covered the cargo with tarps and listened for the sound of other engines, which we did not want to approach. On the second day, the air shifted. A wall of dust came, a microburst that slapped the convoy into the shoulder. One wheel went soft, on a boot, and we had to work as surgical teams on the roadside. We patched the tire with a tube from a scooter and kept going. The closer we got to the coordinates, the more the world felt like a held breath. Houses became warehouses, warehouses became ruins, ruins became a skeleton of industry. In the industrial park there were signs of use, footprints, cigarette butts, a broken solar cell propped like an offering. We found a half-buried access hatch with a maintenance lock. The code was faded, but not indecipherable. My fingers, used to solder and code, found their way around the mechanism. Marcus kept a hand on his rifle the whole time, eyes like a hawk, dot inside. The place smelled like salt and rubber, and something that had been cleaned with too much hope. The desalination unit was smaller than the brochures. It was modular, meant for a factory that could handle localized demand. The solar array had been scavenged, but some panels were intact. The pumps were corroded, but repairable. There were signs. Someone had been here recently. A rag on a bench with a smeared logo, a half-eaten packet of nutrient bars. The control panel hummed faintly when I tapped it, a ghost pulse, and then went still. We found logs, an automated maintenance schedule that had once been synced to an AI node. The logs stopped on a date that matched the colony shutdown. After that, they were human notes, maintenance done, parts scavenged, an annotation. If you find this, bring filters. Filter, 0.2 micron, membrane stock S11. It was not a miracle. It was a hunk of hardware that could, with work, become a life source. It needed membranes, pumps, and a functioning solar array. It needed filters we did not have, and a technician who could not be coaxed by hope alone. The plant, in other words, was both possibility and a task that would demand a faint industry of people and parts. That knowledge changed the feel of the rumor. It made it real and far more dangerous at once. If word of it got out, if raiders or fixers learned, it would become a prize worth blood. On the drive back, we moved like people who had seen a promise and understood the ledger. It would cost to realize it. Marcus was quiet. His face had that exhausted look of someone who had seen a road to somewhere and measured it not just in miles, but in human expense. We kept the discovery quiet. We buried the plant's coordinates in the folds of our own maps and returned with parts. A broken pump that could be reworked. A solar inverter that hummed with life after a thorough cleaning. We agreed on a plan that was partly made of courage and partly made of calculus. We would need to build, to find membranes, to secure the site, to arrange a watch rotation that could fend off raiders. The plan meant asking more people to risk more. Back at the compound, the mood had changed. The transmitter's warm glow seemed suddenly like an instruction. We had news, not broadcast news, but neighborhood news, and with news comes obligation. We could not keep this secret forever. Someone on the road could see our coming and infer our interest. Someone could watch the compound's lights and realize we were weaker than we looked. The rising tension was not only in the physical threat of raids, but in the moral arithmetic of who we would trust with the knowledge that could save or damn us. Night fell hard and cold. I lay awake thinking about the work ahead. There was a sharpness in my gut that felt like responsibility, and a dullness that felt like fear. We had a path out of the ledger of scarcity, but to walk it would require us to stitch alliances and lie when necessary. It would require Anna's team to hold the air, and Marcus's to run scavenging missions far beyond anything we had attempted. It would require me to be both voice and planner, to keep broadcasting while also coordinating. Convoys of men who might never come back. The world tightened around that plan like a fist. The rising action was not a single event, but a constellation of small, pressing things. The cisterns dropped by an inch a day. The generators cough. A new poster on a lamppost advertising a militia meeting 3 towns over, and the feel of unfamiliar boots on our perimeter the night after we returned from the plant. The stakes had climbed past mere survival. They had become a wager on whether we could create something that lasted beyond the day. We had the beginnings of an answer, a busted desalination unit, a partly working inverter, a map with a penciled X, and the knowledge that even a good plan can die when people decide it's convenient to take what you've built. So we prepared. We taught another neighbor how to solder, and another how to read rain patterns. We set watches with foolishly good routines. We hid the plant's coordinates in a hollow of an old clock, and scattered our true intentions across several people, so no single betrayal could kill us. When I took to the mic to speak that night, my voice was steadier than I felt. I read weather reports, gave brief instructions on battery cycling, and, in the quiet closing minutes, told a story about a river and a willow. It was small and false and true all at once. Someone called in and asked about the North Road. I answered, with a lie about a broken bridge to keep scavengers from following. Deception is a sin that tastes like survival when you are starving for the future. The rising action continued. A rolling thing that would not be sated. We had a plan, fragile, complicated, and beautiful in its impracticality. We had enemies, circling and a promise to chase. The world pressed in, and we pressed back, tying rope to the edge of a cliff and daring each other to climb. The radio hummed, the batteries glowed faintly, and for the first time in a long while, my hand did not tremble when I held the microphone. I had a reason to speak, and a reason to be afraid. Both of them kept me awake. We had the membranes bundled in the back of a rusted pickup, wrapped in oilcloth and hope. They fit into the world like a small miracle, thin sheets of polymer that could, under pressure and a decent array of panels, turn brackish into drinkable. For 3 days, I slept with my hand flat on the cardboard box that held the plans. On the eve we were to move them north, I announced a maintenance window on the air, 2 short bursts at 10, a long tone at midnight. It was a lie and a promise at once. The short bursts meant all quiet. The long tone meant we're moving. People listen for patterns here. Patterns keep panic from spreading. The convoy left at dusk. Marcus drove with the membranes, and 2 of the younger scavs, who had not yet learned how to flinch at a sudden shout. Anna stayed back to guard the transmitter and tend the wounded. I could see the strain in every face, the arithmetic of leaving numbers of people behind for a chance at saving many more. We had coded our plan until it sounded like a ritual. We had planned for raiders, for malfunction, for misdirection. We had not planned for both a full-on raid and a storm. By midnight, the sky had become an animal, not the peaceful bruise from weeks prior, but a rolling hungry thing. A microstorm came from nowhere, a wall of dust that turned the world into bad film. The radio hummed like a throat clearing. I spoke into the mic because silence is louder than any storm. If you're moving, stay left of the old elm line. Keep lights off until you reach the ford. 3 short bursts at the back of the convoy if you see movement. Do not stop for anything but a wounded child. My voice felt like a thin rope thrown across a ravine. We heard the long tone from Marcus first, faint and brave. Then the ride reports came in. 2 trucks had made it past the rutted bridge and were holding at the trench marker. 1 was missed. Static 8. 3 minutes of a man's prayer. Somewhere in the dark, a horn bled through the storm, a sound that did not belong to us. The raiders were a shadowed fact, not a rumor now. They had learned to move under the same sky we did. The sabotage was surgical. They cut the line to the well outside our perimeter and dragged barrels into the dark like animals. They moved like a tide silent where there should be noise. Someone fired a flare to disorient a bright bloody eye in the middle of dust. My hands went cold on the controls. If the raiders found the convoy, there would be no membranes. If they found the plant once it was running, they would take it. If they found the transmitter, they might turn it into a trap. Choices compress. At the speed of danger. I had 3 options that night, and all of them tasted like iron. Go with Marcus and try to help the convoy push through, and risk leaving the broadcast dark when other people needed instruction. Stay and run the air, guiding the convoy and the community by voice, but inviting the raiders to triangulate our position, or mount a risky deception, fake our signal as if the convoy had been scattered, broadcasting false coordinates to draw the raiders away, while the real convoy took a hidden lane. The last option required timing, a near-perfect understanding of human curiosity and greed. It required a lie on the air that might save people and ruin a man's trust forever. Clara's laugh hovered in my chest like a compass. I remember how she used to scold me for being too practical with my tenderness. "You keep the servers running, Miles," she'd say, "but don't forget to tell people why you do it." Why, indeed. I do what I do so someone might know they are not the last person alive. I do it because voices tether us to a future other than survival. That lesson pushed me toward the lie. We rerouted our broadcast. I set the transmitter to a low-power narrow beam that would sound like a convoy hunkered down 3 miles west. It was a neat, nasty thing to do. Create a phantom of movement. I threaded the tone with false engine reports and a fake plea for help that an observant bandit would hear and go chase. Meanwhile, I whispered into the mic to Marcus, who sketched his route by my voice. Left at the burnt silo, then the old railbait, then cross under the fallen gantry. Cut through the shadow lot, 2 minutes from the plant, I told him. His answer was a breath, and then the hum of diesel that the mic nearly ate. The deception worked, as deceptions sometimes do. We saw the diversion flare twice on the horizon. Headlights swung like a searchlight, then peeled away into the west where our fake convoy had supposedly stalled. I could feel something heavy lifting from my chest, but the night wasn't done, trading in tricks. The raiders were tied to a man named Crow, the sort you hear about in whispered leavings of older towns, and Crow didn't chase empty stories for long. He guessed the real prize might be elsewhere, and his men closed in with a kind of methodical patience that made me sick. Then the plant called. "Marcus." Voice was clipped and small. "There at the perimeter. We lost 1 truck to sand. We've got a man down with a leg. Bleed out quick. I can see the panels. We need you to keep talking, Miles. Tell Anna to hold everything. If the raiders hear us, blow the decoy and say we're gone." His breathing was like the thing inside a bell. I did not move from the mic. My legs were a foreign country. I did what I had always done, turned broadcast instructions into a lifeline. I told Anna to start manual lockdown sandbags, chain the gate, put the old siren up, even if it annoyed the neighbors. I told her to keep the transmitter on low, to only let authorized calls through the filter. And I kept talking to Marcus, narrating the path to the plant, like someone reading scripture. "You're past the silo. Good. 2 lefts now. Hold at the shadow lot. Drop the tarp. Don't stop for anything but the child. If you have to leave someone, mark the spot. I'll come for them." We could see the faint glow of torches near the plant on Marcus' camera. a shard of light visible through a feed weed patched through a salvaged phone. The raiders had arrived. In the dust they looked enormous, a choir of dark things moving, in rhythm. Marcus radioed, voice tight. They're pushing the flank. They have a man with a rifle on the north bund. If he gets line of sight, they can pick the engines clean. That was the moment the choice became sacrament instead of calculus. We could hold the plant if we signed aside the transmitter, if we shut the broadcast down to keep the frequency from betraying us. But turning it off would leave the convoy, blind and families scattered along the old highway, without the broadcast that could guide them to shelter in the storm. If I cut us off to hide, we might save the membranes and lose a dozen out on the road. If I stayed on, I could guide more people to safety, but the raiders would triangulate us, and the price might be the compound itself. I remember the exact sound of the generator that night, a cough that felt like a clock running out. I remember thinking of Clara and Jonah's last day, how the world had demanded I be practical and kind in equal measures. I had always vowed to be both. The vow is a small religion. I chose to keep speaking. We rigged the transmitter to pedal a desperate loop of human rhythm. Anna would pedal for an hour, then Marcus, if he could, then me. The pedal drove an alternator patched to keep the low-power broadcasts alive. It was ridiculous, and it was holy. We masked the frequency with a decoy, and then layered a patterned call that only our convoy could recognize. An old song played at half speed, a cadence Marcus knew. Raiders chase what they can smell. They chase flares. They do not always chase the shape of a human heartbeat over an old ballad. Marcus got to the plant in the teeth of the storm. I could hear his boots on gravel through the line, the sound of a man walking into the hollow of the world. He radioed once more. I'm in. Panels are intact, but low. I can jury-rig a pump with the spare motor we have. I need 2 people. For membranes, 1 to stand watch. Anna, if you can hear me, blow the siren on the 3rd minute when I bring water up. It's the only way to signal without using the main band. That was a request I had to track like a white rabbit. The siren would draw attention anywhere within range. If Anna sounded it, raiders might come running. If she didn't, an approaching convoy at dawn might miss them entirely. The morality of the question folded inward on itself like a knife. A man cried on the line. Not Marcus, but one of the scavs out on watch. They have a boy, he said. Little one, 7, clinging to an engine. The voice broke. I could hear the wind take the rest. I made a decision in the small, private language of people who have lost everything. We would trap, not run. We would make a noise like a prize, in order to make a trap. We set the decoy according to plan. I breathed into the microphone and spoke the line that would mean hold. It was a harmless thing, a weather update ostensibly, but layered. Inside, it was a command for our convoy. Divert to the old ford, under the stones that make a false crossing. The raiders, convinced by the decoy, moved toward the west, while our real convoy cut under the gantry and slid into the plant by a muddy service. Path too small for trucks. The plant came alive on a squeal of small engines and hands that had learned to make miracles out of scrap. Marcus was the type to sweat and curse and find the right bolt in the wrong place. He began to prime the membrane housings, to run salt water through them until the pressure rose and the first thin trickle came out. A humble thread that smelled faintly of iron and lightning. Aina hit the makeshift siren like a bell at the appointed time, a single long note that sounded like a relieved animal. The raiders, confused, split. Some ran toward the bell as if it were treasure. Others chased shadows left in the storm. The cost came sharp and immediate. Marcus stepped into a doorway and a rifle barked. A sound like a body dropping fell through my headphones and clung to silence. Marcus. The name died in my mouth. The radio screamed like a thing with teeth. Aina's voice on the line was none of the words I needed. She swore, said the wrong thing and then the right one. And then there was a howl that was half orders and half grief. He had not died instantly. He had pulled someone, the boy, into his arms and shoved them through the hatch. His hands were blood-slick as he pulled the membrane housing closed with one final wrench. He left marks in my memory I will carry like cuttings. When I finally heard his breath stop, he was not alone. The plant was running. Water trickled and then sang in a way that made you want to sob. The membranes were doing what they were made to do. People screamed and cheered in small animal ways through the static. The convoy made it. The child was safe. I held the mic until my throat bled for a sound that could explain away the cost. And there was no explanation bigger than the simple ledger. We gained water and lost Marcus. Anna came on the air, voice a shard. She described the plant, the first cup of water, the boy's wet hair. She then, with a voice that had been hammered flat and rebuilt, told a story about a man who had given his life to make the world less thirsty. She read out the names of people who had helped, including Marcus, and we cussed and cried and traded promises like currency. The generator finally died that night, not because the storm wanted it, but because we had given away our last cans of fuel to power the pumps for the brief, precious cycle that brought membranes dry and started the flush. We lost Marcus, and we gained running water. The moral calculus of the night sat in my gut like a stone. I had lied on the air and justified it. I had watched a man sacrifice himself and told his story into the microphone as if telling the story made the cost lighter. It did not. It only made the cost visible. In the dawn that followed the storm, the sky was a strange, honest gray. The smell of wet dirt was a sacrament. People came in small groups to the plant, with jerrycans and grief. They accepted water with the tenderness you show to a fragile animal. I wrote Marcus's name on the ledger, under debts paid. I spoke his name into the mic, and told the world about a small, hot man who had loved a better future enough to pay for it. The watershed of the event was not neat. We had water, but it would take work to sustain the plant. Membranes wore. Panels needed alignment, and the watch roster would have to be maintained like a prayer. There would be raider reprisals, and there would be people who thought we should have done better, or different, or less costly things. There would be rage and sorrow, and 100 small reckonings. But the plant running meant the ledger had shifted. The arithmetic of desperation had altered in favor of more people for a while. That night, after the work and the small funerals, I wired the transmitter to a dead battery and placed Marcus' dog-eared map on top like a quiet flag. I spoke into the mic, voice hoarse and soft. I told the story of the night, not as a sermon, but as a ledger, who we owed, who we lost, who we could be if we chose to be kind, in addition to being clever. I promised to keep the voice on, as long as there was a pedal to turn, and lungs too. Clara's laugh was a compass again. Jonah's cartoon, a small, absurd victory. Marcus sacrificed Wade, like truth. The turning point was not a thunderclap that ended all suffering. It was an incision, difficult, bloody, and honest. The plant ran. People drank. A child slept that night with a belly full of water for the first time in months. And I learned that being a voice means sometimes making terrible, necessary decisions, lying, deceiving, trading a life for many. The ledger is not forgiving, but it is real. We carry the costs, and, if we are lucky, convert them into reasons to keep breathing. When you are a man who keeps a transmitter warm, you do not get to pick clean endings. You get to pick what to carry forward. I chose to carry Marcus's name and the sound of running water. That is the tether I choose to hold onto as the world continues to bruise and breathe. Asterisk. The morning after felt like a day that had been promised twice and delivered once. The storm left the world, washed and raw, gravel still slick. Dust settled into new patterns, and the smell of wet earth that tasted like a benediction. People moved through the compound like they were learning a new language, hesitant, hopeful, clumsy with prayer. They carried jerrycans that glinted like small fortunes. They kissed mouths of bottles and wept into their sleeves. That scene alone told you more about change than any bulletin could. We had water, and water changes behavior. The plant did what it was meant to do in the blunt, honest way of hardware. It turned brackish into usable water. It did not fix everything. The membranes clog, filters need bat flushing, the pumps require oil and bearings, and the occasional swear word to keep running. Solar panels needed cleaning every third day in a place where grit is constant. The desalination plant was a promise tied to maintenance schedules and the goodwill of neighbors who could show up at dawn to wipe panels and stand watch. It required sweat as a currency more than coin. But promises that demand work are promises. You can trust more than the rare sort that arrives fully formed. Our ledger shifted. The daily calculus, the measure of how much hope we could afford, altered in small but consequential ways. Mothers no longer had to ration a single cup of water between washing a child and making a broth. Farmers could consider saving seed, stock, rather than eating it. The plant allowed some breathing room for planning instead of mere reaction, with the immediate thirst managed. Other needs surfaced. Medical supplies for skin infections that had been ignored. A ragged school for children who had been left to count the days. A modest garden project behind the transmitter that became an educational site for teaching seed saving and grafting. But hope invited attention. The plant's existence leaked in the way secrets always do, through someone's loose tongue, through a trader's boast, through the curious eyes of a passing caravan. Within 2 weeks, we had more visitors than usual. Some came with hands open and honest faces, others with the slow smile of calculation. We had to build a governance that could handle both generosity and threat. We formed a council, Anna, who stitched the wounds and kept the watch schedule. A farmer named Laylee, who knew irrigation from an old life. A man who had once been a logistics clerk and remembered how to order parts. And me, who was cursed and blessed to be the voice on the air. The council was ugly at first. People argued about who would get how much water, about whether outsiders should receive the same ration as members of the compound, about how to structure guard rotations without becoming a militia. The early days were full of small, public quarrels that left teeth marks on the community's sense of itself. But the quarrels were a sign of life. When a people argue over distribution rather than scavenging, something fundamental has changed. I changed, too. The sharpness of grief that followed Marcus's death was a new landscape I had to learn to cross. Guilt was a constant companion, not the crippling kind that makes you freeze, but a heavy, honest thing that reminded me of the choices we had made. I replayed the night in the static between calls, not to indict myself, but to understand what I had done and why. Marcus had chosen to be where he was useful. His last act was to make a gamble for more people than himself. The memory of him, working at the membrane housings, cursing, sweating, steady, is a picture I keep near the transmitter like a talisman. I read his name on air sometimes when people ask who helped, and I watch the way the community leans into that name as if it were a way to anchor the loss. Practically, the plant demanded a new set of skills be taught and learned. We trained 3 men to perform membrane swaps and basic pump maintenance. We established a parts list and a rotation schedule for cleaning and back flushing. We created a watch roster that prioritized skill and rest because exhausted guards make mistakes. We negotiated with neighboring compounds to formalize trade. We could offer water in return for bolts, for membrane stock, for medicine and diesel. Those negotiations were delicate. Offering water could feel like colonial power if mishandled. We tried to structure exchanges with transparency, a ledger in plain sight, announcements over the air, and a barter market where trades were witnessed publicly. There were reprisals. Raiders do not disappear because the weather turns. They adapt. 2 weeks after the plant went online, there was an attempt to divert a supply line. A small team tried to sabotage a feeder pump in the pre-dawn dark. We were not caught by surprise the way we had been before Marcus' death. The watch roster held, and the saboteurs retreated after a short skirmish that cost us panels and a pair of hands that had been part of our rotating crew. We buried another, and learned the difference between sorrow and rage, the latter being useful only when channeled into repair rather than revenge. Nature, too, kept its odd, indifferent rhythm. The wet season that followed our miracle was not a renewal in any grand sense. Rain came in fits and starts, sometimes generous, often cruelly short. The local scrub that had stubbornly clung to the edges of the industrial park grained where the plant's discharge, carefully managed and salted, seeped back into the ground. Tiny shoots of grass pushed through concrete like truths insisting on existence. Birds returned in small numbers, a sparrow, then a pair, then a flock that used our water tanks as a way station. These were not signs of a healed planet. They were the first modest tendrils of recovery in a landscape that remained harsh. The cycles had changed. Seasons were not reliably seasonal, and the balance was unstable. We learned to treat every growth as provisional. What changed most inside me was less tactical and more moral. Where I once treated my role as procedural, keep the server, keep the transmitter, I began to see it as stewardship. Stewardship, in our context, is not lofty, it is methodical. It is the discipline of rotating duties, so no single person burns out. It is the tedious bookkeeping of who repaired what and whose debt is owed. It is the ethical work of deciding who gets life-saving water when the plant's membranes need changing, and you have a finite supply of spares. Being the voice also meant being the conscience. I started a nightly segment where we read the ledger aloud, names of those who had given parts, those who had volunteered watches, those who had died. It became a ritual of accountability in memory. It kept the community honest because everything that happens in scarcity benefits someone and costs someone else. Saying the costs out loud made us human to each other again. There were also small, absurd victories that kept us from hardening into machines. A child learned to whistle a song that we played early in the morning as a signal for a safe water run. We planted tomatoes along the southern wall and got a harvest that fed a dozen people for a week. Someone taught a group of teenagers to solder with a patience that felt like training a new religion. Little things like that, laughter at an awkward joke, a shared meal with someone who had been a stranger a month ago, became indicators of resilience as much as any technical milestone, and yet the future remained uncertain. The plant bought us time, not forever. Membranes have finite lifespans. Salt disposal would become a problem if unmitigated. Solar panels degrade. We could see economic effects. Markets shifted, transport routes altered, and power balances between groups changed. Those shifts could bring cooperation or conflict. My nights are still long and sometimes raw. I wake hearing the echo of rifle fire from the raid that took Marcus. I dream of water running through pipes that never dry. Some nights I am a man sitting at a desk in a building with glass and a river out the window. Other nights I am the tired broadcaster who has to teach a child how to patch a hose. Both are true. Both are necessary to hold. When I speak on the air now, there is a new layer to my voice. It is less theatrical and more documentary. I give weather updates, maintenance, schedules, and ration numbers with practical calm. I also read small things, the names of babies born since the plant came online, the odd joke overheard at the market, the recipe for a kind of stew that requires only a single can of fish and too much gratitude. I have learned to balance the ledger of facts with the currency of hope. The plant did not save us from the planet's larger unraveling. It did not make the sky blue again, but it shifted the immediate arithmetic of survival in a way that allowed people to plan beyond the next hour. It turned scarcity into an orchestrated scarcity with rules and responsibilities. It gave us a reason to negotiate, to trade fairly, to teach rather than steal. The last line in my nightly log reads the same as it has for years. Keep the voice on. That sentence is a vow that grew into something broader. Keep the community alive. Keep the agreements sacred. Keep tending both the machines and the people who rely on them. We will lose people. We will gain people. We will make mistakes. We will grieve. But we will also, with surprising frequency, find a solution, because necessity is a creative force. So I keep the mic warm. I keep the ledger under the loose floorboard, and Marcus map under the transmitter like a small, tender relic. I pedal when the batteries need it, and teach when I can. My hands are calloused in ways I did not expect, but they move with a certainty I trust. We are not saved. We are not lost. We are somewhere in between, practicing the art of living in a place that demands ingenuity and compassion in equal measure. In the quiet hours, when the plant hums and the children sleep with full bellies, I allow myself a breath of hope. It is cautious and practical. Spare membranes on a shelf, a plan to trade with 2 towns over, a schoolroom with 3 books. It is the hope of work done well and repeated, day after day. That is the only kind of hope that fits a world like this, small, durable, and stubborn. Asterisk, the world did not become gentler after the plant started humming. It only became more complicated. The rains still come on their own timetable, and the sky keeps inventing new cruelties. But there is a difference now, a thin, stubborn line between breathing and not, and that line is measured in liters, bolts, and the names we say out loud. Hope is an awkward thing here. It's not a banner, or a speech. It's a thing you can hold. A roll of membrane and oilcloth, a repaired pump, a child who learns to tie a proper knot. It's the small, stubborn acts that add up. We learn to treat hope like a machine that needs servicing. It needed planning, labor, and the willingness to accept that some of the costs would be paid with names. Marcus paid one of those costs. He is in the ledger now, and when I say his name on the air, I feel both the sting of loss and the concrete proof that someone gave everything. So, others might drink. Asterisk, there are days when the grief sits on me like a coat I didn't want to put on. There are nights when the radio is quiet, and the silence makes my teeth ache. But there are also dawns when someone brings a pot of stew and laughs at a joke I told on air. And the sound makes the room feel full enough to be honest. Those small breaks in the weight of things are not miracles in the old sense. They are work, community, and a deliberate choice to notice each other's small victories. Practicalities remain. Membranes wear, filters clog. Panels need cleaning. We still ration. We still have to guard. The raiders change tactics. Climate's tantrums continue. This is not a story with a final end. It is a ledger that keeps, accepting entries. What changes is how the ledger is written. Before, the entries were mostly losses. Now we have credits. A shipment of spare bearings traded for a week of water. A schoolroom that reopens because parents can spare the time. A garden that yields enough for a soup that feeds 20. Those credits are fragile, and they must be defended, not because they are guaranteed, but because they are worth the fight. I have learned to be less proud of my cleverness and more proud of our ordinary discipline. Fixing a pump in the dark is not a heroic act in the movies, but it is the difference between life and death here. Teaching a child to solder a broken charge controller is not romance, but it is the architecture of continuity. The broadcaster's role shifted from being merely a teller of events to being a keeper of obligations. I read the ledger aloud because names matter. Because when you say who gave and who took, it anchors us to a story where reciprocity becomes the law. I am still haunted by choices. There are nights I replay the raid and wonder whether any other play would have spared Marcus. I do not pretend to have clean answers. What I have are records. The reasons we chose as we did, the small miscalculations, the things we could not foresee. Those records are for us, not for absolution. They are for learning and for carrying forward the ways that worked and the ways that failed. Nature is not a patient witness to our drama. It responds and recalculates. The scrub that has greened around the plant is not a sign that the planet has forgiven us. It is a sign that given water, life will take root in whatever soil remains. That brings responsibilities we can't ignore. The plant's brine must be managed so it does not poison the local groundwater. Panels must be sourced ethically. Guards must not become despots. The ethics of survival are an ongoing conversation, one that we read out into the night air and try to refine by morning. So what is my message? It is small and unglamorous, the sort of thing you can act on tomorrow. Keep the voice on. Keep the ledger honest. Teach someone how to fix what you can fix. Share water when it is possible, and account for every trade when it is not. When you make a promise, write it down and say it on the air. When someone dies for a cause, say their name and do not let it vanish into comfortable forgetfulness. The smallest rituals, a nightly list of names, a public accounting of parts, a children's lesson on purifying water, are the scaffolding of a future that doesn't depend on miracles. If I have a plea, it is this: do not let efficiency replace kindness. We are good at optimizing systems. The old world taught us that. The new world asks us to optimize for people, too. A ration that preserves dignity lasts longer than one that breaks a community in half. A guard rotation that rests caregivers is worth more than the temporary strength of a fierce but exhausted watch. These are not sentimental positions. They are practical ones. Communities that protect their weakest members are communities that last. I am also practical about limits. This is not a promise that everything will be fine. There will be more losses. There will be failures. The climate will keep changing, and our technologies will keep failing. But the story we tell while those things happen matters. If we narrate ourselves as people who hoarded and fought, we will become that story. If we narrate ourselves as people who repaired and taught and remembered names, we will live that story instead. Tonight, I will pedal for the map light because the battery needs a top-up. I will read the ledger and remind people of watches tomorrow. I will teach a teenager how to solder a joint the right way, and I will try to laugh when someone mispronounces a name. I will say Marcus' name out loud, and I will tell the child with the new smile where her father learned to dig a well. I will try to be an honest voice, not because my words are magic, but because words, when kept consistent, become trust. So keep listening, if you can. If you have a radio, keep it charged for a scheduled window, and tell someone that you heard the voice. If you have skill, teach it. If you have water, ration it with transparency. If you have courage, use it where it preserves more than it destroys. The world will keep demanding things of us. Answer what you can without surrendering the thread of humanity that ties us to each other. I don't know how long the transmitter will burn. I know only this. As long as even one pedal can turn a wheel, and one throat can speak, I will keep the voice on. Not because I am grand, but because a voice in the dark is a tether. And tethers are how people pull themselves through storms. Keep the voice on, and hold someone's name like a bright coin. That is hope enough for tonight.